Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cloud Wars Live, where we explore today's digital revolution by speaking with business executives and thought leaders who are changing how the world lives, works, plays, learns, and dreams. Today, our guest is Chris Lochhead, he of Lochhead on Different, and also podcaster supreme, Follow Your Different. Chris, welcome. Always great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
Hey, you like the blue shirt?
As Robert.
Yeah, you like the blue shirt? Because usually, I don't go blue.
Yeah, I know. Normally we're doing black, so mixing it up is good. And actually, shirt instead of turtleneck breakthrough, I think, because I'm pretty sure for the first 15 years I knew you, it was pretty much black turtleneck.
Yes, it was a way of simplifying life, I found, and it's good there. Chris, just over on a somber, serious subject for a minute. We are recording this episode here on September 11th. And I know in our previous chats, you have mentioned having attended the 9/11 Museum. Just talk about that a little bit, would you please, and the impression it made on you?
Yeah, I think probably, a fair number of people had mixed feelings about going because on one hand, I wanted to go. And on the other hand, it's heavy and it's going to drive a whole set of emotions. But I went with a good buddy of mine. And here's the thing I think that blew me away the most. So I expected to feel moved by what happened, and I was, and had those kinds of emotions and the anger and the sadness and so forth. But the other thing that happened beyond sort of thinking about the event itself, the day itself, and all of the components of that day, I was blown away by the memorial, by the museum itself. And I haven't heard a lot of people talk about the museum itself. If they have, I've missed it. But I think the 9/11 Memorial Museum in New York is a great example of the absolute power of the human spirit. This place is so incredibly well done. It is so thoughtful, Bob. I mean, I know you've been there. It is so caring. I don't know, this may be a funny way. It's so on point. Like the respect and sort of the showcasing of the lives we lost and of the heroes of that day, and of the tragedy of that day. It's so respectfully done. It's so carefully thought. Every single step in the place is carefully and thoughtfully done. And to me, it's a powerful example of the human spirit to take such a tragedy, such a stain, such a hole in all of our hearts who remember that day, who were alive on that day, and to turn it into that acknowledgement, that honoring of all of it. I was blown away. It made me proud to be a human being, in the sense of when human beings come together with a massive commitment to do something legendary for something that matters so much to so many, and they create the memorial itself. I think it's one of the greatest creations in modern American history, just the thoughtfulness and the care of the memorial itself.
Yeah, Chris, I couldn't agree with you more. And the scale of the place is astonishing, and yet it isn't about some crass thing of showing twisted metal and broken pieces and heart-wrenching videos, but it is about this connection that comes together. And to me, I thought one of the most powerful pieces of it is high up on a wall in the central part. They've got a quote from Virgil, and he says, "No day shall erase you from the memory of time." So it is a forward-looking piece there, and I think everything that you said about how incredibly personal, well done, and in some remarkable way uplifting that place can be. So
no, it is uplifting. That's the crazy thing. You go in expecting to be emotionally crushed, and there are very many crushing things there. There are many memories that come back. I learned a few things that I didn't know or maybe had forgotten. And I'm assuming those sorts of experiences are true for a lot of people who go. Um, uh, but I was blown away by the memorial, and you do leave uplifted. The other thing I need to say, I don't know if you noticed this. I was stunned by this. The number of parents who brought young children, 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds. I was blown away by that, and somehow, I don't know, that's uplifting too. That a parent would bring a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, and I thought, I was amazed by that.
A final thought for me on that, Chris, is for the years leading up to when the museum opened, there would be lines of people standing on the sidewalk looking through the construction fence, year after year after year, 12 months, a year, lined up. There's something about that place that just riveted the human spirit. People, I'm certain, from every country on earth looking in there, just trying to understand, to touch the place in some way. And so as you've described it, what they have created in this memorial is something that is that fulfills that desire for people, I think, in some way to touch a part of our lives, and to have their children maybe get some sense of what went on in an almost untouchable experience or untouchable event. It is, as you said, legendary.
And the thing about that, and I think you just captured it incredibly well. The wildest thing about the place is it captures the worst of humanity and the best of humanity at the same time, and it leaves you inspired because of it.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you for your thoughts there. It's a powerful thing, and I would certainly second you in urging anybody who's around there to go see it. It will be one of the most unforgettable experiences, I think, of somebody's life. So, Chris, if we move from something quite profound to some things that are interesting, maybe a little playful, you had a few things on your list. So last time you talked a lot about the digital life that people have, is in some ways for kids, younger people, it's the real thing. This physical world is not so much the real world, it's the digital world. And we talked a little bit about that. And you've got some here about dating apps and marriage. What do you make of this?
Yeah, so, ever since we talked, and it was sort of rolling around in my head for, I don't know, maybe about a week or so before that, 2 weeks before that, something like that. So this has been fresh in my head, and our conversation sort of lit up my brain even more on it. This idea that what if it's actually true that there's some meaningful segment of the population who their, let's just call it, physical life is in many ways an interruption to their digital life. Unlike you and I, where our experience of being alive is we're alive in the physical world, and we have a digital experience that takes us from the physical world. You could argue adds to it. I mean, there's a lot of positive things about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. I'm a huge fan of it for the most part. But then we put down our computer or our phone or whatever, and we have a conversation, or we go for a walk, or we enjoy a meal, or whatever, or we go to whatever it is we do, right? We engage, whatever it is. But there's a meaningful percent and a growing percent of the population who their digital life is their life, right? The esports and all that. So this story is fascinating. So last time, as part of that, I think we talked about the fact that there are a fair amount of reports out there, I'm sure popularized mostly by dating websites, but that say that approximately 50% of marriages in the United States are originate digitally. So that's fascinating. But then this here is the Wall Street Journal says that dating apps are making marriages stronger. And that couples who meet online tend to communicate better and have longer and happier relationships, and that the rate of marital breakups for people who met online was 25% lower than people who meet in person. And if you read the article, that one of the things they say in here is that people have an easier time now Bob, opening up and being vulnerable and communicating digitally. And so I thought it was an interesting build on the theme we started last time. And it was an insight for me, which is, wait a minute, we're now in intimate, hey, get to know you, maybe go out with you, maybe, maybe you're my spouse, maybe you're not, discussions. We are now at a place in the evolution of human beings, Bob, if you believe this stuff. And again, I'm sure it's influenced a little by some of these companies, but this is coming out from the Pew Center. So I don't know, it seems pretty legit. We're now at a place where in what you could argue is the most intimate of relationships and at the most potent time, which is the beginning where we get to know somebody who might be a potential mate or partner. We're now saying that people communicate more effectively digitally. So they don't just meet more effective digitally, they actually get to know each other better, and that leads to longer marriages. That's what the story says.
Yeah. Yeah. And Chris, funny, in this, this digital world, you hear over and over and over about data, let's talk about the data, data driven, data centric, all these things. But the data data point that you mentioned here, that if you met online and got to know each other online, there is a 25% better chance that your marriage, right, marital breakup will not happen. And so it's the data support this. It's not just some fuzzy feeling somewhere, if these particular data are to be believed.
Well, and look, it says, according to a 2016 Pew Research Center poll, half of Americans know something, and it goes on, right? So this is based on what sounds like some pretty legit research. Now, is it very possible that Match.com sponsored this research? It is. Who knows? So, but I don't mean to be cynical, but regardless,
yeah,
this is a fascinating point, and it just begin. Now I start to see it everywhere, which is I start to notice things that indicate that our digital life is our quote unquote real life, and our physical life is either less important or an interruption, or that our digital ability, our digital experience of our lives is becoming more and more of what our lives are truly about. And that was the insight around the kids who were visiting, which is they're not looking at the sunset because the sunset's interrupting whatever's going on their phone, right? And that I didn't get it because that's their real life, not the sunset at the beach. And so now I see it everywhere, right? Once you notice something, you begin to see it everywhere. And I think this is an interesting example that marriages are stronger when people meet online because they communicate more effectively and more vulnerably and so forth.
Yeah, Chris, it's powerful stuff. And I know that there's in movies and books and all, there's always been this search for, what's real, what's a dream, do those worlds cross? Is there some other consciousness? And I not trying to get overly heavy or weird about this whole thing, but perhaps what seems quirky or odd or unusual to us, your larger point seems to be, hey, you can call it whatever you want, but it is becoming not fringe. This is mainstream. 50% of relationships are begun online today.
Yeah, apparently. So there you have it. So our digital life is our life, and our physical life continues to interrupt it.
It's the pit stop. You got to go in there into the pit to charge those devices and get back to life. So, Chris, we were talking a little bit about the blessed state of matrimony and all that, and now you've uncovered a little wrinkle here about floral arrangements and how we try to celebrate these great occasions.
Yeah. So, God bless America. There's a trend, apparently, according to NBC News, and there was a CNBC article about this and so forth, that a trend now in marriages is we put pot in the wedding bouquet, and even in some cases, like in the floral arrangements, at the dinner table or wherever. And so we have cannabis now. And so the headline here says, "Saying I do with your best buds." And then I love it's just like a bunch of funny headlines. There's something blooming when it comes to wedding planning. Brides are using cannabis plants to arrange bridal bouquets. The growing trend in marijuana matrimony. How do you like that for a new category?
Oh,
Has guests waking up and smelling the roses as couples take their special day to a higher level. Yeah, there you have it.
If Match.com was involved in some of the earlier research, perhaps, yeah, I guess some of the cannabis companies now, it's like, hey, let's get into content marketing and start pumping this stuff out.
And see, here's the thing. Maybe we've been looking at this wrong. Maybe Cheech and Chong had this right the whole time. See, most weddings have an open bar, right? And have you ever been to a wedding where, shit gets weird? Like, I went to a wedding. I swear to God, I'm not making this up. I went to a wedding where the groom got into a fight with his father-in-law, and it was not cool at all. And the groom ended up in jail. He spent the wedding night in jail because he incited a fight with his father-in-law, the father of the woman he just married. They got into a fight at the reception, and the cops showed up, and the groom went to jail so that he could chill his nuts out. Nobody got charged with anything, and nobody got really hurt, but it got that stupid. So, and here's the thing, alcohol was involved. So maybe now you go to weddings and it'll be like an open cannabis bar, and you'll have a bud tender, and everybody will have a little toke and calm down, right? Because people can have anxiety, they can get upset, they can drink too much, they can incite fights and end up in jail. And maybe now pot's gonna like chill everybody out. A little Cheech and Chong going on.
My goodness. Yep, Chris, it's a scary world out there sometimes. I mean, the guy's, he's got 50 or 60 years to fight with his father-in-law, but he couldn't wait one day, 24 hours?
No, right there. I mean, we're talking hours after actually marrying his daughter.
Well, maybe it's this whole, this real-time stuff, the urgency of the moment.
Yeah, and the funniest part of the whole thing was the cops said they get called to weddings all the time.
But probably not for the groom. But who knows? Chris, sometimes the outcome, the fruit of matrimony, can be a little bundle of joy, a little baby, and we all want to take the best possible care of babies. And now it seems like the world of AI has entered baby care.
Yeah. So Google, it's not enough for them to have a quote speaker in your house and listen to everything you say, right? That's not enough. Now what we're going to have is a Google AI quote unquote. And by the way, my friends at Grumpy Old Geeks, the legendary podcast Grumpy Old Geeks, Brian Schulmeister, and of course Jason DeFilippo, they get furious when anybody says AI. Okay. Because they say their point of view is there is no AI. There's machine learning, and then there's human beings, and you don't actually talk to Hal. We're not actually there yet. But anyway, they get very funny about how much they hate the word AI. That said, Google's building an AI baby monitor, and get this, the device would aim. Oh, and we found this out because they filed these patents. So this is how the news came out.
So the product's not out yet.
They are in the development, but the patents just hit and the media got hold of this thing. The device would aim to determine when the baby is, quote, in a non-auditory discomfort state, end quote. A non-auditory discomfort state. Who talks like that? What does that mean? I think it means if your baby, looks distressed. I think that's what that means. But a non-auditory discomfort state. Fucking A, guys. Anyways, and will inform caregivers up to 10 minutes ahead of the baby waking up, according to a patent. Now, get this. This is how they're going to do it. Google's smart AI machine learning baby monitor will have, quote, eye tracking technology that would detect when a baby is awake, asleep, or close to stirring. using video streaming, audio recording, and AI. Sorry, guys. The device will monitor the baby's behavior against a database of normal patterns. So they're going to have video streaming of your baby in real time with eye tracking technology. And so they're going to monitor everything about your baby, and they're going to compare that against all the other billions of babies in their database to tell you whether something's up with your baby or not.
My goodness. Chris, what, I don't know. That some of the language that's used there is the non-auditory discomfort state. I believe I experience the non-auditory discomfort state every once in a while, but I try not to use this sort of
Normally
language.
it's after a night of drinking.
Yes, yes. Weddings even sometimes, we'll
yeah, exactly. Weddings can
go. And Chris, last episode, just I got to touch on this because your point about artificial intelligence and there's no such thing. But last time you talked about, was it Goldman Sachs and the 5-year study on copywriting, content development?
Yeah.
Chase, JP Morgan Chase, sorry. And they spend 5 years doing that. And it turns out that the ones created by non-human entities were more effective than the ones created by humans. So I just think the term AI is odd because it's artificial means it's not real, but that was pretty darn real.
Yeah, no, I hear you. This though is fascinating because of course, like all of this stuff, you got to think about the pros and the cons. There's a case to be made that this kind of monitoring of a child could save lives. It may be many, many lives. Maybe the physical movements of an infant stored in a database. There will be dots connected that we couldn't have imagined. It's almost, you could say it's almost likely that there will be some fascinating breakthrough insights that will come that potentially could have a huge positive benefit. And you could argue, if it saved one baby's life, then it would be worth everybody jumping in and doing this thing. On the other hand, however, Google will now have ongoing streaming video of your children. They'll know by definition how many children you have. They'll know a whole bunch of things about your family. They'll know who your caregivers are, or certainly they'll know who you give access to this feed. Right. And by definition, that person is a caregiver or somebody important in your life and the child. I mean, you just think how much more Google will know about human beings and about specific human beings. And so Google wants to analyze you from the minute you show up.
Yeah. And when you're not even awake. I like that thing about it will notify you 10 minutes before the baby wakes. That's pretty precise. So maybe there's some algorithm that does all that, but because I think, like a lot of companies, you look at some of the biggest tech companies and many other types of companies as well, in or out of the tech industry. But since Google's in tech, right, this issue of trust, rises to the top. So the point you just made about the potential benefits of this, on the other hand, the trade-offs, I think you got to earn a whole lot of trust right before you're going to start letting somebody have any insight into what's going on with your baby. So I'm not sure. So I, in some ways, admire their willingness to push the boundaries of research and all this. This is, I get the creeps from this.
It fires up my George Orwell. It sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, so if you could do this for babies, now why not for, a middle-aged guy? Maybe like, hey, your nap's long enough. You got a to-do list. It's time to wake your ass up.
Well, and at what point are they going to come forward with an argument, and maybe a legitimate one, who knows, that having an adult monitor is what you want. So everything they just said is now pointed at you and I. And it's going to give us all sorts of data around, how much REM sleep we get and this and that and the other. And, there'll be some argument about why this AI streaming nanny cam for yourself is a really good thing because it'll improve your health because you'll know all this stuff. Or I don't know what, I'm making this up, but there will come some argument for why we should do this to ourselves. I mean, there are already sleep monitors.
Yeah.
Right. So isn't this the next evolution in sleep monitors, even for non-babies?
Well, and the case is strengthened for that sort of approach when you reflect back on some of your comments from a few minutes ago about, for a growing number of people, the digital world is the real world. Right? That's a place where I exist and want to exist. And if this enhances my digital life, well, heck yeah, it's good. Let's go get it. I'm gonna decline.
Yeah. Well, and there's a whole bunch of news coming out of Google now about how they're integrating the Nest stuff, and I think they're now calling it Google Nest Hub Max. The bigger Nest Hub is, well, this, I guess CNET doesn't like it, but they've built this hub thing now where everything connects. So all of the cameras and speakers and all of the in-home IoT type stuff that they're doing, they've sort of pulled it together in a suite that I think they're calling Google Nest. And this is the review here on CNET on the Nest Hub Max, which sounds like they don't really like. But yeah, it's got screens and cameras and speakers and oh my.
Hey, Chris, what you're talking about that name, and in your former CMO life, you're reflecting a little on the naming there. Did you hear this morning that Salesforce has come out with a new ad campaign, marketing campaign?
This almost sounds like you're setting me up for a joke.
No, I wouldn't do that. But they say that they want to try to, all the things, humanize their brand and all that. But it's like reconnect companies with their customers. That's their basic approach there. And it's interesting because Salesforce doesn't sell to consumers, but the ad and marketing campaign is going to be aimed at that. And I thought it was an interesting angle here for a tech company. And I wondered if you get your CMO disgruntifier Bob you later on and see what you think of that.
Here's what I think about it. I think Bob Evans and the Cloud Wars team is doing a very good job, because as you were talking, I Googled Salesforce, I clicked on news, and the first thing that comes up is cloudwars.com, Salesforce demolishing B2C and B2B with slick new ad campaign.
Well,
so you guys are killing it on the making a independent media company thing happen here, Senator Evans. That's the first thing I think.
Was I groveling for a compliment there? Was it that obvious, that transparent? I'm sorry. I just say it's so, it just, I think a reflection more, right? That these big technology companies stepping out of their former sort of isolated roles and coming into people's lives. Salesforce, Benioff has been saying over and over, he said, every company has, whether you sell through channels or partners, you got to have a direct relationship with the customer. And I just think it's so interesting that they are choosing now to come try to inform the world about how they help businesses do that. It's a sign of, I think.
The interesting thing too is how simple the idea is. Quote, we bring companies and customers together.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there is this feel-good thing that companies are trying to wrap themselves in today, more than ever. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal not long ago about how there's a group of CEOs, Fortune 500 type CEOs, who are saying companies have to be on a mission greater than just delivering returns to shareholders, and there's got to be some kind of a good for people, good for the world, social good component, and that overly focusing on quarterly earnings. And there are a lot of venture capitalists now. There's a lot of debate in Silicon Valley right now around, quote unquote, the ethics or the morals of venture capital. And if you had the big parlor question in Silicon Valley right now is, if you had an opportunity to invest in Juul and make a ton of money, knowing what we now know, would you? So there's all this discussion about sort of the role of companies, and and should it be bigger than just making money? And so it's interesting to see Salesforce doing this.
Yeah, and Chris, I wanted to use that just to touch over on a company you admire greatly, and that is the medium through which we're connecting right now, Zoom. And your buddy Eric Yuan, you had some interesting little details and thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, in this regard, I think, as you and I were growing up in the tech industry, there were a lot of very tight-knee type, Darth Vader-y dudes starting and running companies, right? And sort of this very sort of manly, macho sort of vibe for a lot of tech CEOs and entrepreneurs, and sort of rule with an iron fist, and sort of that sort of a character or image.
Yeah, Chainsaw Al Dunlap, just right, part of his name.
Al, yeah. How would you like to? Well, so here's the point on Eric. He's the opposite of Chainsaw Al, and nobody's calling him Chainsaw Eric. And this guy, I think, is emblematic now of what we're starting to see, the new founder CEO. His whole thing, we just had him, he's been on my podcast twice, and he just came back. So they just did an IPO. The company's valued north of $20 billion. It's an 8-year-old company. They raised $350 something million in a crazy successful IPO. Eric's now a multi-billionaire. And if you listen to the episode, or you talk to him, or you hear him anywhere, he's like this, and I say this in the most laudatory way I can say it. He's this very simplistic, sage-like, almost Yoda-esque in the way he talks, right? It's like, so you ask him a question like, "Hey, Eric, how do you build a legendary business that in 8 years goes public, raises over $300 million and is worth over $20 billion and personally turns you into a billionaire? How do you do that?" Right? And I'm exaggerating on purpose, but yeah, ask him, how do you be successful in business as an entrepreneur? Things along those lines. He says, well, you hire people, you make them really happy. You focus on making your customers happy. It's really important to make your investors and your partners happy. And if you create an environment where your people are happy and your customers are happy and your investors and your partners are happy, you'll be happy and successful. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but
yeah.
It's, and then I got to show you this. Let me grab it. There's this website, Glassdoor, where it's sort of the Yelp of companies, right? Where employees go on and rate their employer anonymously, of course. And so if you go on Zoom, if you go on Glassdoor and you take a look at Zoom, let me make sure I get this right. The ratings on Zoom and Eric are absolutely crazy. They're in the 90s. I'm not pulling this up quickly enough, but the bottom line is the employees get to rate the company. They say, would they refer a friend to work at this company? And they get to rate the CEO. And on all of these dimensions, Bob, it's in the high 90s, like a 97% approval rating for Eric as a CEO.
Unbelievable. And Chris, what was your point about his eight tries? He has quite a record, and what you've always said about perseverance.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing. So Eric is like myself, an immigrant to this country. Unlike myself, he's from China. And when he was a young engineer in China, he saw Netscape go public at the beginning of the internet when, you remember it well, of course. And there was something in him that said, I got to get to the United States. I got to get to Silicon Valley. I want to be part of this. And it was a very hard thing for him to get into the United States as a young engineer. And it took him 8 tries to get accepted to come here. And I look at that and it fires me up to say, hey, we got to get on figuring out immigration for entrepreneurs, right? Why are we, this guy, in my opinion, is emblematic of the American dream, of the entrepreneurial dream, and the immigrant dream, which of course are all sort of intertwined with each other, right? But it's the classic story. Immigrant comes here, applies himself, figures some shit out, goes for it, and now has created a $20 billion plus publicly traded company that has built an incredible technology, an incredible category. He's created a tremendous amount of wealth, and he's a freaking billionaire, and he's making a giant difference in terms of this wonderful technology that we're currently using that, you know, many, many thousands of people love, right? And so my point is, hey, what's the immigration strategy on trying to attract as opposed to repel the Erics? That's where I go, and it makes me angry, and I get all fired up. Here's what Eric says when I ask him about that. You ready?
Yeah.
I think it was a good thing that it was really hard for me to get into the United States, because it taught me as a young man perseverance. And I have persevered over and over and over again in the face of ridiculous odds. And so I think it was a good thing, right? And so like, this guy is just like a happy sage, and he could look at something like that as a positive when it makes me angry.
Yeah, it is a remarkable story what's gone on there with him, but he had the idea, and you said, you know, he's kept a sense of humility, doesn't try to make it up in, you know, Clash of the Titans and all this. He's just saying, you know, make people happy, do good things, you know, keep
The thing
on
I love,
cooking
I
them.
asked him the question, you know, what it was like to go public and so forth and so on. And he said, well, we celebrated for half a day, and then we got back to execution, because we got to continuously make our customers happy and make our people happy and make our investors happy. And like, and you kind of believe him. That's probably what happened. He probably had a celebration for the morning when you ring the bell. And then I bet you at 1:00 he was on a conference call with customers or partners or somebody, or looking at product. I have no doubt.
Yeah. Chris has a story from what is 20-ish years ago after Microsoft's IPO. And there was a report, I think from Fortune, but he was allowed to spend a little time with Gates after the IPO. And Gates was walking through one of the offices where some of the developers were, and a couple of them had these charts hanging on their cubes, and it showed the, you know, rapidly climbing stock price right after the IPO for Microsoft. And they said, the reporter says Gates, you know, tugged one of these things off the wall, and he said to the developer, "Does this help us sell more software?" So this notion of whether it's celebrating or diluting the focus onto things that aren't necessarily right, pretty good line there from the sage Mr. Yuan to figure, okay, let's have a little fun. That's not the goal. So let's get back on target.
Yeah, he's so endearing. And I think it's an incredible story. It's an incredible inspiration for all of us. And even if you're not entrepreneurial yourself, you know, if you're somebody who believes in the American dream, the power of technology to make a difference. And look, I know to some people this sounds corny. I don't care. You know, it's being pessimistic, being negative is easy, and sometimes, look, I get it, and I can go there too. And maybe sometimes you could argue it's called for. I would give you that, but I choose to have a little bit more of an optimistic view. And I look at an entrepreneur like Eric, and I think there's been a lot of negativity around Silicon Valley lately, and some of it deserved. But I think when an entrepreneur does what this man has done, I think it's worthy of celebration for all of us who believe in innovation, who believe in technology, and support entrepreneurship.
Not corny at all, Chris. It's one of the reasons we love you. It's one of the reasons why Follow Your Different has become one of the top podcasts in the world. And thank you so much for being part of the show here today. It is always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I love doing this with you, Bob.
You're the best. And next time, maybe we'll talk about, you got fire on your desk. We'll see what's going on there.
It looks more dramatic on the Zoom video than it actually is in person.
See, it's just one more thing that Eric is doing for you.
Exactly.
All right, brother. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Chris. Thanks to all of you folks for joining us here at Cloud Wars Live. Enjoy it, and we'll see you next time.